You don't belong near that display. Step back, or I'll have security escort you out." The words sliced through the boutique's polished air like a blade. Victoria Langston, the store manager at Luminary Gems' Miami flagship, didn't lower her voice or check the name on the woman's card. She just stared, eyes narrow, tone sharpened by bias and stress, as if the presence of Elise Warren in her navy blazer and faded flats was some kind of threat to the pristine glamour of the stellar collection behind her. Before we dive into this true story of power, prejudice, and justice served in real time, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments, and type the word equity if you believe respect should never depend on appearance. This one's going to stay with you. Let's begin. The sunlight shimmered off the glass doors of Luminary Gems, glinting off gold-lettered signage as a quiet woman stepped out of her 2005 Toyota Corolla. It was just after 2 p.m. on a humid Tuesday, and Elise Warren, age 42, founder and CEO of Luminary Gems, walked calmly toward the boutique she had built from the ground up. She didn't wear designer heels or arrive in a luxury car today. Instead, she wore her mother's silver bracelet and a quiet fire in her chest. Reddit threads and internal reports had hinted at a troubling pattern inside the flagship store. Customers of color receiving colder treatment, being asked to wait, denied access to high-value pieces, or spoken to with suspicion. Elise didn't want an assistant's report. She wanted truth, raw and unfiltered. So she came alone, unannounced, with no entourage, no title badge, just herself. The boutique was bustling. Overbooked appointments from earlier that morning had pushed staff to the brink. Customers browsed, whispered, pointed at locked glass cases, and murmured about exclusivity. The Stellar Collection, valued at $3 million, gleamed at the center of the store, diamond-cut brilliance resting on velvet, and beside it stood Mrs. Harrington, early 60s, pearls nestled around her neck like a second skin, and entitlement clinging to her every glance. Her eyes swept over Elise, then curled into a sneer. "I didn't realize they were letting just anyone browse today," she muttered, just loud enough for nearby staff. And Elise to hear. Victoria Langston didn't flinch. She stepped toward Elise, chin raised, and said, "We're currently prioritizing appointments for our elite loyalty clients. If you'd like to schedule a time, please exit and check our kiosk outside." Elise calmly presented her platinum card, but a payment glitch from 2 minutes earlier, logged at 1:57 p.m., had flagged her card as unreadable in the system, a quirk of the POS software the staff had been struggling with all morning. Natalie Wong, the 25-year-old assistant manager, peered at the screen and shook her head. "You're not registered in our system. Ma'am, this section is for verified clientele." She didn't scan twice, didn't check Elise's ID, just handed back the card like a used receipt. Elise's hand brushed her bracelet, her mother's, the same one worn the day Elise was refused service at a boutique in Chicago when she was 25. She had just gotten her first bonus as a young financial analyst and walked into a luxury store with her head held high, dreaming of buying her mother a real necklace for once. But before she could even reach the glass case, the sales associate told her, "We don't carry your price range. Try downtown." She left the store that day without saying a word, but the shame clung to her like smoke, and that shame became fuel. It planted the seed for a brand built not just on brilliance, but on dignity. That seed became Luminary Gems. "I'd like to view the Stellar Collection," Elise said evenly, eyes calm but voice firm. Natalie shifted in front of the display case like a human shield. "It's for verified customers only," she repeated, behind her. Mrs. Harrington let out a condescending laugh. "Perhaps the outlet malls would be a better fit," she said, sipping champagne. Elise blinked slowly. "That's quite a statement," she replied, Coming from someone currently wearing a knockoff Van Cleef pendant. Mrs. Harrington's jaw tensed, but it was Victoria who stepped closer, lowering her voice only slightly. Ma'am, if you don't leave now, I'll be forced to involve security. Elise pulled her phone from her purse, hit record, and angled the camera steadily. Let's make sure everyone sees this, she said, lifting her gaze to meet Victoria's. Just then, a man across the room, salt and pepper beard, phone already in hand, called out, "You're not the only one recording." His name was Mr. Langford, age 55, a journalist who had experienced his own share of silent treatment in stores like this. "It's live," he said, "and people are watching." The tension inside the boutique was palpable now. Other customers began turning toward the scene. Some whispered, some lifted phones. One child asked his mother why the lady was being yelled at. Near the entrance, a tall black man in a tailored charcoal suit took a careful step forward. James Carter, age 48, security officer off duty, here as a customer. But his posture shifted the second he recognized Elise. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked gently. Elise nodded, eyes still fixed on Victoria. "Let's just say I'm being told I don't belong in a place I built." James exhaled slowly, glancing around. "This ain't the first time I've seen this here," he murmured. "But I didn't know who you were." Elise's voice was quiet but clear. "That's the point." Across the boutique, Natalie whispered something to Victoria, who stiffened. Elise's presence was unsettling her now. Victoria turned to the stellar case and adjusted a pair of earrings. Anything to regain control. That's when James stepped forward again. "Funny thing," he said loud enough for the room to hear. "Mrs. Harrington over there filed a bias complaint against this store last month. She said staff ignored her because they thought she didn't look wealthy enough." Silence rippled through the boutique like a dropped champagne flute. Mrs. Harrington's cheeks flushed. "That's a lie," she barked. "You're fabricating nonsense." "Actually," Mr. Langford interrupted, raising his phone. "It's on Reddit, with a timestamp. Same user handle you used when reviewing your maid service." A collective gasp moved through the store. Customers leaned in. Even Natalie looked stunned. Elise took a small breath. Her voice remained steady. "So let me get this straight. I walk in here, clean, calm, presenting valid payment, and I'm told I don't belong. Meanwhile, someone who faked bias to cover their own embarrassment is being offered champagne and escorted to million-dollar displays." Victoria blinked. Her voice faltered. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Elise said, lifting her phone higher. "That's the problem." Her bracelet caught the light as she turned toward the crowd, toward the cameras, toward the shame and silence now seeping through the boutique. "If you've ever been judged by your skin, your clothes, or the car you drove, this moment's for you," she said. "And I'm just getting started. Online." Mr. Langford's livestream jumped past 7,000 viewers. The footage was already being clipped, shared, and reshared, and back at the front of the boutique, James Carter nodded solemnly. "We see you," he said. Finally, in that moment. Elise didn't just stand in her store. She stood for every customer who had ever been treated like less, for every voice ignored, every gesture dismissed. Her phone kept recording, and in her eyes, fire. Victoria's bias had lit the match. What came next would be a reckoning. "You're being disruptive, and I've asked you to leave. I'm calling security." Victoria snapped, her voice louder now, sharp with desperation. The store's curated elegance had shattered, cracked by tension, truth, and the weight of being exposed. Elise Warren, still poised in her navy blazer, didn't flinch. Her phone continued recording. "Call them," she said softly. her eyes never leaving Victoria's. Let the world see exactly how your store handles uncomfortable realities. At that moment, Mrs. Harrington gave a theatrical sigh, rolling her eyes as she adjusted her knockoff pendant. Honestly, if she can't afford to be here, maybe she should shop somewhere more suitable, she said, her voice soaked in entitlement. Natalie Wong, standing stiffly at the POS terminal, glanced nervously at the frozen screen. The payment glitch had never been corrected. In her fatigue, she hadn't tried a second scan, and now her gut told her something was terribly wrong. James Carter stepped beside Elise, his presence steady, protective. "You still haven't verified her payment," he said, addressing Natalie. "Instead, you jumped to judgment." Natalie fumbled for words. It said invalid. She's not in the system." James raised an eyebrow. "And you scanned her card once, during a system error you've been dealing with all day?" Natalie didn't respond. Elise pulled her second phone from her purse and made a quick call. "Lydia, activate the media alert," she said. "This store, right now. I want press, legal, and the PR archive ready in 60 seconds. On the other end, her assistant Lydia confirmed. "Understood. Media alert triggered. Mr. Donovan is on standby." Elise ended the call, eyes still on Victoria, and as she returned the phone to her bag, her fingers grazed the bracelet again, her mother's silver heirloom, cold against her wrist but blazing with memory. She thought back to a Tuesday afternoon 12 years ago. She had just turned 30, dressed in a slate gray suit, fresh from giving a guest lecture at a financial leadership seminar for young women, wanting to reward herself. She walked into a luxury boutique in Midtown Manhattan, hoping to buy a brooch she had seen in the display weeks earlier. But as she crossed the polished marble floors, a saleswoman intercepted her. "Deliveries come through the back," the woman said bluntly. Elise was too stunned to respond. I'm a customer," she finally managed. The woman's lips curled. "You're not our usual type." That humiliation had followed her for months, and it burned more than the first time, because that time, she thought she'd earned respect. But in that moment, she realized something deeper. No matter her achievements, there would still be places where she would be reduced to a guess. That moment had solidified her mission. That mission was luminary. And now, that mission stood on trial, right here, inside her own walls. "Now, would you like to double-check my credentials? Or are you ready to be in tomorrow's headlines?" Mr. Langford, still live-streaming, quietly narrated. "For those just joining, the woman being threatened with removal is Elise Warren, the CEO of this very store chain, Luminary Gems, and the people trying to throw her out are about to become very famous, for all the wrong reasons." Victoria took a shaky breath, then grabbed her phone and dialed store security. "We have a disturbance in front of the Stellar case," she said. "Unverified customer refusing to leave." Elise tilted her head. "Not unverified," she corrected. "Unwelcomed." Behind her, a murmur rose among the crowd. Customers were no longer pretending to shop. They were watching, filming, whispering. Natalie suddenly blurted out, "We were told to prioritize elite loyalty clients. I didn't know." Her voice cracked. "We never had proper DEI training. They canceled it last quarter." Elise raised an eyebrow. "You skipped the very training designed to prevent this exact situation?" Natalie's face flushed. She nodded once, hands trembling. "They said the budget didn't allow it." Elise's voice didn't rise. It dropped. Calm. Cold. Precise. "So instead of knowledge, you relied on instinct, and your instinct told you I didn't belong." The store was dead silent now, save for the hum of the ceiling lights and the soft chime of someone's text alert. Mr. Langford zoomed in on Victoria, whose arms were now crossed tightly across her chest. This woman has refused to follow basic procedure. She hasn't provided identification. She's disrupting other clients. Elise gently placed her Luminary Gems ID on the counter. Here's my identification, she said, coolly. Founder, CEO, majority shareholder. Shall I keep going? Victoria's face turned bone white. Natalie backed up 2 steps. Mrs. Harrington scoffed again, but this time the sound didn't land the same way. It echoed like an empty note in a now sober room. Elise stepped forward. 5 years ago, I launched a fairness audit across every store. I trained managers myself, and yet here I stand, treated like a thief in my own flagship location. James folded his arms, standing just behind Elise. All this, he said quietly, over a misread card and a navy blazer. Natalie whispered something to Victoria, but it was too late. Mr. Langford's camera was locked on. Tell them what you did, Elise said suddenly, turning toward Natalie. What you just admitted. Natalie's eyes welled with tears. We never did the training. We just assumed. We assumed who mattered and who didn't. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. Before Elise could respond, Mr. Langford raised his phone. There's more, he said. Just found this. He turned the screen toward the room. A digital screenshot of staff notes appeared, dated last week. It showed Victoria manually overriding a customer verification for Mrs. Harrington despite a flagged payment, while simultaneously logging Elise's card as invalid during a separate test run. Looks like Victoria here covered for a friend, he said, and made sure others, less photogenic ones, were turned away. Elise stepped toward the screen, her jaw tight. You covered up a glitch to favor someone you deemed acceptable, she said, her voice now tinged with controlled fury. How many others have you dismissed this way? Victoria opened her mouth, then shut it. The air in the store thickened. Mrs. Harrington began to edge toward the exit. James stepped to the side, blocking her path. Leaving so soon? He asked. You haven't seen the rest. Mr. Langford's live stream view count crossed 11,000. Comments poured in. Elise turned to the room. This isn't about one rude manager or one skipped training session, she said. This is what happens when perception replaces policy. When bias gets written into how we treat people, when you look at someone like me and assume I couldn't possibly belong near $2 million diamonds, she looked to Natalie. And what would have happened if I had raised my voice just once? Natalie looked away. Elise turned back to Victoria. You threatened me with security for asking to view merchandise. You ignored my card. You ignored my words. But now you can't ignore the truth. At that moment, security entered the store. A tall man in a gray uniform with a badge and earpiece. He glanced from Victoria to Elise, then spotted James. Sir? He asked. James raised a hand. She's the owner, he said. You're done here. Victoria's mouth opened again, but no words came. Elise looked at the guard. Please remain near the door. I'll be needing your witness statement shortly. He nodded. Stepping back, Mr. Langford chimed in once more. For everyone watching, this is what accountability looks like, live and in full color. The woman they tried to silence is the very force they answer to. And the truth is no longer behind glass. It's everywhere. Elise tucked her phone into her bag and faced Victoria one final time. You wanted to prioritize elites. Well, I built this company for the people you left outside the rope. And now, the velvet rope comes down. And as the boutique pulsed with the weight of reckoning, one thing was clear. This wasn't the end. It was the spark. I want to see identification, Natalie snapped, stepping forward with sudden boldness, her voice louder than it had been all afternoon. Her eyes locked onto Elise's with an urgency that felt less about policy and more about panic. If you claim you're a client, you need to prove it. Right now. Around them. The store had gone quiet, except for the occasional ding of a text or the rustle of someone shifting their weight while filming. Elise didn't move. Her hands remained at her sides, her phone still recording. Victoria smirked beside Natalie. You know, she said coldly, I've worked with this brand for 9 years, and I've never seen someone demand access to our rarest collection without credentials or prior appointment. This kind of behavior is exactly why we have standards. Elise's gaze didn't waver. And yet those standards seem flexible, she said, tilting her head toward Mrs. Harrington, who was now sipping another complimentary glass of champagne and pretending to scroll through her phone, though her eyes were locked on Elise with quiet fury. She's never had to present ID, Elise added, her tone precise. Funny how that works. Natalie crossed her arms. She's a verified elite loyalty member. You aren't even in our system. Elise's fingers twitched at her side, again brushing her bracelet, again tapping something much deeper. The memory rose without warning. She was 35, walking into a luxury boutique in Los Angeles with a CFO title, a tailored navy jumpsuit, and a glowing profile in Forbes published just the month before. She'd been invited to a client event, one hosted by the brand itself. But when she approached the staff member at the Velvet Rope, the woman didn't smile. She glanced at Elise, then at the name on the RSVP, and frowned. Are you sure this is the right list? She asked. Maybe your catering staff? Elise hadn't answered then. She had just turned away. Calm on the outside, a riot of humiliation on the inside. That moment, too, had fueled her mission, because being disrespected when people assumed you had nothing was one thing, but being disrespected when you'd built everything, when you were invited, when you belonged, and still being told no, that was a different kind of sting. And here it was again, dressed up in different names and faces, but the same poison. Elise slowly reached into her purse and placed her official Luminary Gems ID on the glass counter, next to her untouched card. You asked for identification, she said quietly. Here it is, founder, CEO, visionary behind every product you sell, the name you skipped over when you denied me service, access, and dignity. The room seemed to shift. Mr. Langford zoomed in with his phone, whispering into his stream. She just laid it all out. The manager didn't know she was the boss. And now the boss is done playing games. James stood a step behind Elise, arms folded like a sentinel. Natalie's face went pale. Wait. No, she murmured. That can't be. Victoria took a step forward, her face flushing with embarrassment, but trying to hold her ground. Even so, she began, your card was invalid. That's how this all started. There was a glitch. Yes, but you never rescanned it, James cut in. You never checked. You just assumed. And then you threatened me with removal, Elise added. You mocked my clothing. You ignored my questions. You made room for someone who lied about being mistreated to gain favor. She gestured toward Mrs. Harrington, who was now pretending to look bored. And you left me to stand here like an intruder in my own store. Mrs. Harrington scoffed. You're overreacting. None of this was personal. Bias always feels impersonal to the one delivering it. Elise replied. It's the people on the receiving end who carry it for years. Natalie tried to retreat behind the counter, but Mr. Langford caught her movement. Hold on, he said. There's something else. He tapped his screen. Elise, I just got a message from a former staff member. Anonymous tip. Apparently Ethan Caldwell, Your regional supervisor, who's been advising Victoria by phone, was named in a bias complaint last year. It was quietly closed, no action taken. Elise's brow furrowed. Show me. He handed her the phone. The complaint was logged, detailed, and marked handled internally. It included claims of Ethan pressuring managers to prioritize elevated clientele over walk-ins. Even when policy said otherwise, Elise's voice dropped low. That complaint was buried. It's real, Langford confirmed. I verified it with a screenshot from an internal message board. Elise let the screen fall to her side. And this is the culture that grew from it. This is what happens when you ignore smoke until the whole store catches fire. Victoria's phone buzzed. She answered it quietly, stepping aside, only to return seconds later looking shaken. Ethan says you're overreacting, she muttered. He's on speaker. Elise's eyes narrowed. Put him on. She held her phone toward Victoria's. Ethan, she said calmly, this is Elise Warren, CEO. If you have something to say about how I'm conducting myself inside a store I created, say it now. On the line. Ethan hesitated, then stammered. Ms. Warren, I didn't know it was you. I thought. You thought wrong, she said, cutting him off. And now we all see where that thinking led. Natalie looked like she wanted to disappear. Mr. Langford moved to record the phone screen, Ethan's name and number visible. The comments on the live stream exploded. People were calling for firings, accountability, and boycotts. James leaned over. This has gone viral, he whispered. And it's only been 5 minutes. Elise nodded once. That's all it ever takes. 5 minutes to reveal a system. 5 minutes to show someone's values. 5 minutes to expose who gets protected and who gets dismissed. Then she stepped forward, standing at the Stellar case she'd been barred from since she walked in. She pointed to a pair of earrings displayed unevenly, slightly off angle, one prong catching more light than the other. This case isn't aligned, she said calmly. Just like this store, just like the culture that allowed it. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but Elise raised a hand. Save it. This moment is no longer yours. She turned toward the customers, toward the cameras, and toward every silent witness holding their phone aloft. I was told I didn't belong, that I wasn't a priority, that I couldn't be trusted to view my own collection. And now I ask you all, do I belong here now? Silence hung for a beat, then a few scattered nods, then applause, then a voice, young, firm, from the back of the room. Yes, ma'am, you always did. Elise smiled, not for approval, but because the reckoning had finally begun. Security to the front. Now! Victoria's voice cut through the boutique like an alarm, her composure collapsing under the weight of exposure. She pointed directly at Elise, her tone sharp with forced authority. She's not following protocol and is interfering with client experience. The words echoed across the showroom, brittle and loud, but Elise didn't budge. She stood calmly beside the Stellar collection case, phone still recording, eyes locked on Victoria like a mirror refusing to flinch. Near the back, Mrs. Harrington let out a performative gasp. I don't feel safe, she said with theatrical emphasis, clutching her purse like a stage prop. She's creating a scene. This is not how luxury retail is supposed to feel. James Carter stepped closer, standing beside Elise like a wall. Ma'am, you might want to think twice before pretending fear when cameras are running, he said to Mrs. Harrington, whose lips thinned, but she said nothing more. Natalie Wong, still frozen near the POS, tried to mutter something about misunderstanding, but the damage had already been done. Victoria moved back behind the counter, pretending to straighten paperwork, then shouted again. Security is on their way. I want her removed now. Elise, steady and deliberate, placed her hands gently on the misaligned glass case and spoke, not to Victoria, but to the room. I've spent years building a company that stands for equity, access, and dignity. I trained people in this very store, and now I'm being treated as a threat in the same space I designed to protect people like me. Her voice didn't rise. It deepened, carrying weight. This isn't about policy. This is about perception. A hush swept through the boutique. Cameras stayed up. Mr. Langford's live stream ticked past 25,000 viewers. At that moment, Elise's memory flickered. Age 38, 2 years before the current moment, when she walked into a partner store in Dallas during a holiday rush. She had come to inspect a faulty lighting installation, but arrived in jeans and sneakers, unannounced. A manager had mistaken her for a delivery driver and told her to drop the box in back. She had smiled politely, said nothing, then returned 2 hours later in a silk blazer and watched the same manager fall over himself with apologies. She didn't fire him. She thought the lesson would stick, but today proved otherwise. Back in the present, Elise looked toward Natalie, who was trembling now. You've been quiet, Elise said. Wasn't it you who called me unregistered? Who denied my payment without rescan? Natalie's voice cracked. I didn't mean to. It wasn't personal. Elise tilted her head. Bias rarely is. It's routine. That's why it's dangerous, Victoria interjected. Why are we still discussing this? She's not a verified client. She's refusing to leave. Elise turned slowly, lifted her phone, and panned across the store. To everyone watching, she said into the camera, this is how bias hides, not in slurs, but in silence, in skipped scans, in how a manager offers champagne to one woman and calls security on another. Mr. Langford stepped forward, holding up his own phone. Elise, he said carefully, I just received confirmation from a whistleblower. I've got screenshots of internal staff logs, notes about certain customers being flagged as low priority based on appearance or assumed income. The files include dates. They show that this has been happening for months. Elise's jaw set. Let me see. He turned the screen. The names weren't surprising. The language was subtle but damning. Phrases like watch profile, non-elite window shopper, and divert from high-value cases. Victoria's initials were on 5 entries, Natalie's on 2. Ethan's were tagged on approval chains. You were writing people out of dignity, Elise said, her voice tight. You took people's silence as permission. A few customers gasped. Others shook their heads. James leaned toward Elise. You want me to read this out loud? He asked. She nodded. Let everyone hear it. He did. One entry included a note dated just last week, saying, Limit time near Stellar case for non-elite walk-ins. Confirm status first. The line was initialed V.L. Victoria's face drained of color. Natalie took a step back and whispered, That wasn't meant to be like that. Elise turned to her. And yet it was. Then Mr. Langford added, There's more. I found a demotion memo addressed to Natalie, dated 4 weeks ago, stating she'd be demoted unless she showed greater loyalty to elite engagement strategy. The language was coded, but the intent was clear. Elise looked straight at Natalie, whose mouth dropped open in shock. You were pressured, Elise said, and instead of speaking up, you passed that pressure down, onto me. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. I was afraid, she said. They told me I was replaceable, and you replaced your conscience to keep your job. Elise replied, That's how this begins. Behind her. Mrs. Harrington muttered, This is turning into a circus. It's ridiculous. Elise turned slowly. You have something to add? Yes, Mrs. Harrington said, indignant. Some people just don't fit the environment. It's not always racism, it's just reality. James stepped forward. And sometimes reality needs a reset. Victoria finally snapped. You don't understand what it's like managing this location. The pressure, the expectations. We don't have time to babysit everyone who walks in off the street. Elise stepped forward until she stood inches from Victoria. You just said that? On camera. Her voice was steel. And you still think I'm going to let this slide? Victoria looked around, realizing the silence in the room had turned into judgment. The staff, the customers, the security officer who had quietly entered and was now standing near the entrance with his arms crossed. Everyone was watching her unravel. Mr. Langford whispered. Trending on Twitter. It's everywhere now. Elise turned back to the cameras. You want to see what real luxury looks like? She asked, her voice unwavering. It's not diamonds. It's dignity. And with that, she placed her palm on the stellar display case, and everything began to shift. Elise stood still, hand resting lightly on the stellar collection case, her gaze unwavering. Around her, the boutique had gone utterly quiet, the tension thick as breath fog on glass. Then, in one deliberate motion, she reached into her bag, pulled out her black leather business card holder, and slid a single silver-edged card across the counter. Read it out loud, she said, her voice calm but resolute. Victoria stared at the card without touching it. Elise's tone sharpened, not louder, just unyielding. Read it. Victoria swallowed, hands trembling slightly, and lifted the card like it might burn her. Elise Warren, she began, voice hoarse. Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Luminary Gems. A small gasp rippled through the store. Mrs. Harrington's eyebrows rose in disbelief. Natalie visibly deflated, her eyes darting from Elise to the camera phones and back again. Elise took a step forward. You wanted credentials, she said. There they are. Now here are mine. She turned toward the security officer who had quietly entered moments ago and gestured to Victoria. Escort her to the back. Her employment is terminated immediately, pending formal documentation through legal. Victoria's mouth opened in protest, but no sound came out. Elise didn't give her space to recover. You're being let go for cause. Documented pattern of discrimination, obstruction of equity audits, and mismanagement of staff conduct. My attorney will follow up within the hour. Until then, you're not authorized to access company systems or records. Victoria took a breath, but the words still wouldn't form. She looked around for support, found none, then turned stiffly toward the back hallway. Escorted by the guard, Elise turned next to Natalie. You're suspended immediately, not just for today, for a full DEI review and compliance investigation. I'll determine your future with Luminary after we speak. On record. With Mr. Donovan. Natalie nodded weakly, tears rolling down her cheeks. I didn't mean to, she whispered. Intent doesn't undo harm, Elise said, but it does shape what comes next. Then Elise tapped her earpiece and spoke quietly. Lydia, open Ethan Caldwell's internal file and flag him for immediate review. His judgment and leadership need serious evaluation. On the other end, Lydia responded briskly. Already on it. PR alert is at red level. Journalists are pinging us nonstop. Elise gave a single nod, then turned her focus to the woman who had hovered like static noise since the moment she walked in. Mrs. Harrington, she said, her voice now wrapped in ice. I'd like to discuss your loyalty status. The older woman's chin lifted. What about it? She asked, brittle and smug. Elise gestured to Mr. Langford, who held up his phone and displayed a company database screen, sent anonymously moments earlier. "It appears," Elise said, "that your Elite account was created using falsified documents. The ID you submitted matches one that was flagged for loyalty fraud last quarter, under a different name, different birth date. You shouldn't have had access to this store's Elite tier in the first place." Gasps spread through the room like wind through dry leaves. Mrs. Harrington flushed crimson. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "You're accusing me of violating terms of service." "Yes," Elise cut in. "And effective immediately. You are banned from all Luminary properties. Permanently." "You can't." "I can," Elise said. "And I just did." Mr. Langford panned his camera across the shocked faces in the store, narrating softly. "She just fired the manager, suspended the assistant, and banned a fraudulent customer, all in the span of 2 minutes. James stepped forward with folded arms. "Justice doesn't always knock," he said. "Sometimes it kicks the door open." Elise's hands returned to the stellar case, carefully aligning the misangled earring display with precise movements, setting order back where chaos had lived. Her voice softened just slightly. "I built this company because at 25 I was humiliated in a store just like this. At 30 I was mistaken for a delivery woman. At 35 I was turned away while wearing a Forbes pin. And even now, today, I walked in here and was told to leave. That cycle ends now. With me." She turned toward the staff, most of whom stood frozen near the walls. "Let me be absolutely clear," she said. "I'm not angry because I was insulted. I'm angry because I was expected to take it." Natalie choked out a sob. "I'm sorry," she said again. "That apology isn't for me," Elise replied. "It's for every person who walked into this place and left feeling like they didn't matter." She glanced toward the cameras. "This wasn't just about one customer. It was about all of them, then," as if snapping the final piece into place. "Mr. Langford turned his phone screen around again. "Elise," he said carefully. "One more thing. Someone just forwarded me internal emails. Ethan Caldwell suppressed several customer complaints tied to this store, forwarded them to a closed-issue folder without escalation." Elise didn't flinch. "That confirms my decision." "And," Langford added, "a second tip just came in. Mrs. Harrington's alias has popped up on 2 other retail bans. She's gamed the system before." Elise let out a slow breath. Fraud on top of fraud, and still treated like royalty, while I was treated like a criminal. She looked toward Mrs. Harrington, then past her. "This is what bias looks like, dressed in entitlement, propped up by silence." Elise lifted her phone one last time. "To anyone watching this, know your worth. If they question it, show them your value. And if they still doubt you, own the building." She placed the phone down and stepped back from the case. "This store is no longer what it was 5 minutes ago," she said. "It's what it will become." At exactly 2:05 p.m., Elise stepped to the side of the Stellar Collection case and placed a call to Mr. Donovan, her attorney. Her voice was calm but clipped. "The termination is formal. Proceed with documentation. Include violation of DEI policy, discrimination, and misrepresentation of client records." On the other end, Donovan responded. "Acknowledged. Paperwork will be transmitted by end of day. I've notified HR and compliance." Elise ended the call without hesitation and turned back to the boutique, now buzzing with quiet murmurs and blinking phone screens. Victoria had been escorted to the back, and Natalie stood off to the side, eyes down, suspended and silent. The live stream, still running through Mr. Langford's feed, had reached over 75,000 viewers, with comments surging by the second. One read, "The CEO just walked in and cleaned house. In 5 minutes flat, another said. Equity in action. This is how you run a company. Elise raised her phone again and opened her secure internal dashboard with a few swipes. She tapped into store-level access, updated the org chart, and submitted a promotion notice for Ethan Caldwell, temporary store manager, under pending review. Then she spoke aloud, addressing staff and customers alike. Effective immediately, Ethan Caldwell is promoted to interim store lead, reporting directly to me. He'll complete an Equity Glow compliance audit within 7 days. And until that's done, every client interaction in this store will be logged and reviewed. Several staff exchanged glances. Ethan, listening from the phone line still open on Victoria's desk, stammered. Ms. Warren, thank you. I'll do better. Elise didn't smile. See that you do. She then turned toward the middle of the store, lifted her phone camera once more, and announced, Today marks the launch of Luminary's Equity Glow protocol, an internal training, audit, and accountability system that will apply to all 50 locations, retroactively and forward. Applause rose in small, stunned waves. Mr. Langford stepped closer, camera raised. This is the most comprehensive live correction I've ever seen, he whispered, but before Elise could respond. Natalie spoke. There's something else you should know, she said, her voice trembling. Victoria told me last week to start deleting bias logs. She said if we didn't sanitize the records before Q2 audit, we'd both be written up. I didn't do it, but I didn't stop her either. Elise's expression didn't change, but the weight behind her stare sharpened. So she planned to falsify the audit? Natalie nodded, her voice cracking. Yes. Elise turned to Mr. Langford. Get that on record. He already had. But another twist followed. Langford glanced down at a new notification. This just came through, he said. A senior VP at Luminary, Kevin Abrams, has been flagged in an internal leak. He received bias complaint summaries last year and never escalated them. Ignored 3 filed reports, including one naming Victoria. A cold silence fell over the store. Elise closed her eyes for half a second, jaw clenched. Then the problem wasn't just at the surface. It was in the foundation. She stepped back, exhaled slowly, then faced the room. We can't fix what we refuse to acknowledge. That ends now. She tapped her bracelet once, her mother's bracelet, and added, This isn't about PR. It's about truth. Reform isn't an initiative. It's a responsibility. Natalie wiped her eyes. James nodded slowly. Customers stayed rooted in place, watching not a takedown, but a transformation. The boutique felt changed, as if justice had swept through its walls. And Elise, standing calm but unshaken, had not just fired a manager, she had reset the company's moral compass, publicly, deliberately, and without apology, by 2:10 p.m. The boutique had quieted not because the cameras stopped rolling, but because Elise Warren had taken full control of the narrative. Security had escorted Victoria out of the building, her exit quiet but definitive. Natalie was suspended pending internal review. Ethan's conditional promotion was processed, his voice still reverberating from a quiet thank you whispered over the store intercom. And Mrs. Harrington, who once sneered at Elise's shoes, was long gone, officially banned from all Luminary stores and flagged in the client system for fraud. But the moment wasn't about punishments. It was about purpose. Elise stood near the center of the boutique, no longer just a CEO, but the embodiment of reform in motion. Mr. Langford's live stream, now being mirrored by dozens of media accounts, captured her as she turned to the remaining customers and staff and spoke, not as a boss, but as someone who had lived the story too many times. Let today be a line in the sand, she said calmly, because justice isn't just a press release. It's what happens when someone speaks up and refuses to back down. Equity begins with who we see and who we don't. She walked back to the Stellar case, the same one she'd been denied just minutes ago, and adjusted the display one last time. Then she turned to Mr. Langford. "You stood with me. Thank you." She handed him a black card, embossed in silver. $5,000 Luminary Honor Card, for courage and truth. He blinked, visibly moved. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," Elise replied. "That's why it matters." Customers clapped quietly, then louder. The boutique, once frozen in discomfort, now hummed with something unfamiliar. Respect. James leaned over. "That was beautiful," he said. "You didn't just fire them. You raised the standard." Elise nodded. "Because the truth has to outlive the outrage." Then Ethan, now visible on a staff tablet, asked hesitantly, "How did you stay so calm?" Elise turned slightly, her eyes softening. "Because power isn't how loud you speak. It's how steady you stand when they try to move you." Just as the moment began to settle, Mr. Langford's phone buzzed. He glanced down, frowned, and said, "There's more." He held up his screen. A leaked recording from a Luminary board archive showed Kevin Abrams, the former VP, admitting on a Zoom call. "Yes, I deprioritized DEI complaints. We didn't want to damage brand image during expansion. If a few stores had to fudge reports, so be it." The timestamp was from 6 months ago. Elise stared at the screen. "So the rot went further than I thought. But it's public now," Langford added. "And it can't be unseen." Elise nodded slowly, then turned back to her internal dashboard and formally removed Abrams from Luminary's strategic advisory list. "Done," she said. "The reckoning doesn't stop at the floor. It reaches the top." Just then, another ping. Mr. Langford opened a message. Victoria just issued an online apology. He read it aloud. "I'm deeply sorry for the misunderstanding at Luminary Gems. I've always supported inclusion. The situation was misinterpreted. I wish Ms. Warren all the best." Elise arched a brow. "PR spin," she said. "That's not an apology. That's a headline patch." "Agreed," Langford said. "I traced it, written by the same media firm that covered her last compliance issue." Elise looked out across the boutique one final time, scanning the faces of staff, of customers, of strangers now turned witnesses. "We've heard enough fake apologies. What we need now is action." She walked slowly toward the door, then turned once more. "Equity is the heart of retail. You want to sell beauty? Start by treating people like they belong." She paused, her hand on the door. "And never assume a quiet woman in old shoes doesn't own the building." Months later, Luminary Gems would roll out the full Equity Glow protocol chain-wide. Customer satisfaction rose, staff diversity reports improved, and Elise Warren would be invited to speak at national leadership forums on crisis ethics and restorative retail. Her message? When bias shows up, don't back down, lead forward. In the final footage from that day, Elise walks out into the Miami sun, calm, proud, and finally seen, not as a customer, not even as a CEO, but as a woman who turned one moment of humiliation into a movement. Equity prevailed, and retail would never forget her name.